I was 11 when Mr. Hensley leaned over my desk, his shadow stretching across my notebook like a warning. The numbers had tangled themselves again, shapeless and unkind. I'd tried to understand the way electrons danced or how formulas found meaning in chaos. But I froze, as I always did when his voice turned to thunder. "You're too stupid for science," he said, loud enough for my classmates to hear, quiet enough to avoid scrutiny. The words didn't hit like a slap. They settled like sediment, sinking to the bottom of me, silent and unseen but impossible to forget. He moved on. And I sat still, staring at my notebook, my cheeks hot with shame. Around me, the room resumed its rhythm, whispers, giggles, the scrape of chairs on linoleum, but inside me, the world went quiet. That kind of shame doesn't erupt. It seeps. After class, I threw away the worksheet with the crossed-out mistakes. That night, I told my mother I had a headache and didn't touch the flashcards she'd made, the ones she colored herself so I'd remember the periodic table better. She always tried so hard to make things easier. But how do you tell your mother that your favorite subject has just turned into a graveyard? The days that followed blurred. I stopped raising my hand. I circled the correct answers timidly, then erased them, second-guessing myself. I'd been branded by those words, and no one looked at me the same. Or maybe I just couldn't look at myself the same. Still, life continued. I grew. I changed schools. I told people I liked English better, that I wasn't a science person. The lie hardened into habit, even when the itch returned. When I'd catch myself wondering how stars burn or why certain chemicals glow under blacklight, I'd silence it. I built a fortress of avoidance. Then, something shifted. I was 16, working part-time at the public library, when I stumbled across a book misfiled in the art section, Women in Science, 50 Fearless Pioneers Who Changed the World. The irony didn't strike me until much later. At that moment, I was just intrigued by the cover, bright colors, a girl in a lab coat with wild hair and a look of defiance in her eyes. I read it under the circulation desk, stealing minutes between patrons. And by the time I turned the last page, something inside me had cracked open like a geode. There were women in that book who'd grown up poor, who'd been told no, who'd fought for lab space or respect or simply the chance to learn. They'd failed, often. They'd been mocked, doubted, dismissed. And they'd changed the world anyway. I checked the book out under a fake name, part of me still afraid of being caught wanting something I'd been told I could never have. That book led to another. Then another. I started volunteering at the Museum of Natural History downtown, offering to clean glass cases if it meant I could watch the lab tech sort fossils or catalog minerals. I took notes obsessively. I memorized terms for the thrill of knowing, not the pressure of a test. It felt secret and sacred, mine alone. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not my friends. Certainly not any teachers. I didn't need approval anymore. I needed freedom. When I applied to college, I marked undeclared. But when I sat with the course catalog in my dorm room that first week, my finger landed on Introduction to Chemistry, and I didn't move it. I felt the same thrill I had at the library, holding that book like it might combust in my hands. The first semester was hard. My hands trembled during lab exams. I panicked over equations. I cried often. But this time, no one told me I was too stupid. And slowly, painfully, I started to believe it wasn't true. By junior year, I was leading study sessions. By graduation, I was top of my class. But it wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about reclaiming something I never should have had to lose. There's a kind of hunger that has nothing to do with food. It gnaws at you in quiet moments, late nights in the lab when everyone else has gone home, during walks across snow-covered quads when your breath turns to steam and you wonder if you're still chasing something or if it's chasing you. For me, that hunger wore many names. Redemption, maybe. Or validation. Sometimes I think it was simply the longing to hear someone say, "You were wronged, and you rose anyway." But no one ever says that. So I wrote it in my results instead. Graduate school was not kind. But neither was I. I'd learned by then to shape pain into focus, to turn sleeplessness into fuel. My lab partner called me the quiet storm behind my back. I heard him once, laughing with someone down the hall. She's either going to burn out or burn the world down. I smiled. They didn't know about Mr. Hensley. They didn't know about the 11-year-old girl who stopped speaking in class after one careless sentence undid her joy. They didn't know about the books I'd hidden under my bed or the scholarships I'd applied to behind my parents' backs, or how I still flinched a little when anyone praised my intelligence, as if it might be revoked the moment I believed in it. They saw a focused, brilliant young woman who wore dark cardigans and always had ink smudges on her fingers. They didn't know she'd once thrown away her science fair project because her teacher called her an embarrassment. It took years to admit that part out loud, even longer to stop being ashamed of it. But science is funny that way. It doesn't ask for your pedigree or your pain. It only asks that you listen, observe, and remain curious. And I was always curious, even when I wasn't brave. My work focused on molecular engineering, specifically biomimetic design. How we could replicate the genius of natural systems in synthetic materials. Spider silk, lotus leaves, bones that healed themselves. Nature, it turns out, is the original scientist. And I was just humble enough to learn from her. The deeper I went, the more I realized this wasn't just research. This was reclamation. Every breakthrough felt like recovering a part of myself that had been exiled. Every paper published was another brick in the house I was building, sturdy, measured, real. When I got the call about the nomination, I thought it was a prank. I was eating yogurt at my desk, hair tied back with a pencil, rereading peer reviews of my latest submission when my assistant walked in, eyes wide. There's someone from Stockholm on the line. I think it's the call. I laughed, choked on my yogurt, and asked her to repeat it twice. But it was true. My work in regenerative materials, specifically the synthetic replication of a certain marine compound that could heal itself after structural damage, had been selected for the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. I stared at the wall for a long time, not because I doubted the science, but because I suddenly heard a voice I hadn't let myself remember in years. You're too stupid for science. And, beneath it, something new. Do you remember me? The first snow fell as we landed in Sweden. It came down in gentle, indifferent flurries, like the sky itself couldn't be bothered to register the magnitude of the moment. Stockholm glittered beneath us, a city dipped in frost and history. I had been named a Nobel laureate, and the world had started calling me brilliant, visionary, even genius. But those words brushed against me like strangers. They didn't know the girl who had sat in the back of class, too afraid to raise her hand. They didn't know the weight of words like stupid when spoken with authority. They didn't know that I still, sometimes, rehearsed my answers 3 times before speaking in meetings, just in case I got it wrong. I wore a navy blue gown to the ceremony, one I'd chosen not for its beauty, but for the way it made me feel like armor. The fabric shimmered slightly when I moved, like water under moonlight. My assistant had said I looked like someone who commands storms. I'd smiled, touched the cuff where I'd stitched a tiny diagram of my molecule, into the lining. A silent tribute to the years no one clapped. The banquet was held in the grand hall, all crystal chandeliers and golden banisters. Every face around me belonged to someone who had scaled their own Everest. But I wasn't looking for glory. I was looking for him. And there he was. Mr. Hensley. Older, of course. His hair had gone silver, and the weight of time sat heavy in his shoulders. He was a guest of one of the attending educational groups, something about early science education and its impact on the future. The irony nearly knocked the breath from me. He didn't see me at first. Why would he? To him, I'd been a footnote, a lesson in failure. A child not worth investing in. But I remembered him. I remembered the exact shade of his sweater the day he said it. Forest green. The chalk on his fingers. The way he leaned in, as if crushing me was a kindness. I waited until after dinner, until the applause had settled and the glasses clinked low with brandy and satisfaction. Then I walked across the room, my heels soft against the marble floor, and stopped in front of him. He looked up. I said, "Do you remember me?" He blinked. For a moment, his eyes searched mine. Something flickered, a slow rewind through memory. Then recognition. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Just a slow, stunned nod. He was unable to find the words. That was my gift to him. I didn't offer spite or triumph. I didn't recount the shame or the silence or the years it took to undo his sentence. I didn't need to, because the room already said it for me, because my name had been called, my work had been honored. My presence had arrived not in spite of him, but beyond him. So I smiled, not with cruelty, but with calm. And I turned away. That night, after the banquet, I returned to my hotel room in silence. The lights of Stockholm blurred through the frosted glass, soft and diffused, like a memory you can't quite hold steady. I didn't take off the dress. Not yet. It felt like shedding armor before the war had ended. Instead, I sat on the bed, heels still on, the lace cuff brushing against my wrist where the molecule lay embroidered, my secret rebellion sewn into silk. Everyone tells you that success is the best revenge. That when you stand tall in the same room where they once overlooked you, it should feel like victory. But it didn't. Not exactly. What it felt like was a soft ache. Not painful. Just persistent. Because no award could return the moments I'd lost. The way I'd shrunk myself in rooms, doubted every instinct, stayed silent in seminars I should have led. What Mr. Hensley stole wasn't my intelligence. It was my certainty. My trust in my own voice. And yes, I got it back. But the getting was brutal. I remembered the long winters in graduate school when I ate cold oatmeal from a mug because the lab hours didn't allow for real meals. I remembered the imposter syndrome that clung to me like a second skin, making every praise feel like a mistake that would soon be corrected. I remembered the quiet breakdown sophomore year, the way my knees gave out on the library floor after a failed experiment, tears pooling silently in the pages of my lab notebook. No one noticed. I cleaned it up. I always cleaned it up. And I remembered my mother's hands, the ones that used to make flashcards. She'd passed away 2 years before the Nobel announcement. Never saw me publish. Never saw me win. She would have understood what that moment meant. She would have clapped the loudest. And so, as the snow continued to fall outside, I poured a glass of water, removed my heels, and finally slipped off the gown. I folded it carefully, fingers grazing the molecule stitched at the cuff, then placed it gently in the drawer beside the bed. Tomorrow, I would speak to young girls in a classroom. Tomorrow, I would show them what survival looks like stitched into silk and bone. But tonight, I let myself feel it. Not pride, not revenge, just peace. They say the strongest trees grow in the harshest soil. If that's true, then my roots are tangled deep in bitter earth, nourished by cold winds and silent storms. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's story, or at least the version told loudest enough to drown the quieter ones. My parents worked hard, but never quite broke the surface of the community's expectations. My father was a man of few words, his affection measured in the groceries he brought home and the rare Sunday mornings he'd spend fixing the leaky roof. My mother was soft-spoken, with a laugh that lit up the kitchen but never quite reached the dining room where my father's silences filled the spaces between us. School was my refuge, or at least it should have been. Except there was always Mr. Hensley. He had that kind of authority that stilled a room, the sharp tone of a man who believed knowledge was a gatekeeper, and he held the key. He was a storm cloud in my sky, and for years I felt small beneath him, like a single leaf in a forest of giants. But there was a part of me no storm could drown. My grandmother, who lived down the road, was the first to see it. She was a woman who wore her wrinkles like badges and told stories that smelled of fresh earth and old wood. She taught me to plant seeds in the frost, to tend to what you could not yet see. "You're a river, Olivia," she'd say, holding my small hands in hers. "You might be quiet now, but you'll carve your way through stone." It was her voice I returned to during those dark classroom moments. Her stories of resilience became a whisper in my ear, a quiet defiance that wouldn't let me break. After school, I spent hours in her garden, learning the language of roots and growth. I discovered the delicate balance of patience and persistence. When the first crocus poked through the last snow, she smiled and said, "That's your spirit." I held onto that spirit fiercely. When the world told me I was too stupid, it never touched the part of me that knew that the river always finds its way, no matter the obstacles. Those roots kept me anchored through every rejection letter, every doubted idea, every lonely night in the lab. And when the snow falls again, no matter how deep it piles, I remember that beneath it, the roots keep growing, unseen but unbroken. There's a moment in every story when you stop waiting for permission and start giving yourself the license to be. For me, that moment didn't arrive with fanfare or fireworks. It was a small, private revolt, a single defiant breath in the silence of a classroom. I was 13, and Mr. Hensley had just dismissed my science project, a crude attempt at understanding photosynthesis, as child's play. I sat on the edge of the playground bench, clutching my notebook filled with hand-drawn diagrams and notes I'd taken from the library books my grandmother had helped me find. That afternoon, I made a choice. Not to prove him wrong, not yet, but to prove to myself that my curiosity mattered. I started to write. Every day after school, I penned observations, how the sunlight filtered through leaves, how the shadows shifted as the day moved on, how plants bent toward the warmth like living things desperate for hope. I created my own journal, a secret garden of knowledge and wonder that no one could take away. When I felt invisible, I found myself in those pages. When doubt whispered I wasn't good enough, I wrote louder. And slowly, that quiet act of rebellion grew. By the time I was 16, those journals had turned into research notes. By the time I applied for college, I had a portfolio that told a different story than the one Mr. Hensley had written for me. No one could take away what I had claimed in ink and observation. Sometimes, survival isn't about shouting back at the storm. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Family has a way of stitching itself into every corner of your life, sometimes with threads of love, sometimes with strands that bind tighter than you realize. Mine was no different. My parents had dreams for me, not the ones I carried in my heart, but the ones they'd crafted from their own hopes and fears. They wanted security, stability, a clear path. Science, for them, was either a stepping stone to a prestigious profession or a distraction that needed correction. When I first told them I wanted to pursue science, their smiles were polite but guarded. "It's a tough field," my father warned. "Maybe consider something more practical." My mother nodded, eyes soft but concerned. "We just want what's best for you." I nodded too, swallowing the ache behind my words. There were dinners filled with unspoken expectations. Conversations steering me toward safer subjects. The subtle questions. "Have you thought about teaching? It's stable. You'd be good at that." The sighs when I stayed late at the lab. The raised eyebrows when I turned down social events to study. I learned to wear their hopes like a second skin, heavy and constricting, but necessary to keep peace. Yet beneath it all, the river flowed. I carved out time in the margins, early mornings before anyone woke, late nights when the house was still. I read papers no one asked me to. I experimented with ideas whispered in my dreams. I dreamed quietly, fiercely, without permission. Breaking free wasn't loud. It was gradual. It was choosing my own path despite the threads tugging at me from every side. It was learning that love sometimes looks like sacrifice, not just mine, but theirs too. And that the greatest rebellion is becoming yourself. There was a day, simple in its unfolding, that changed everything. I sat alone in the university auditorium, waiting for the scholarship announcements. The room buzzed with eager faces, whispered hopes, and the rustle of acceptance letters. When my name was called, not just for participation, but for a prestigious research grant, it felt surreal. Like the world had tilted, just slightly, to reveal a path I hadn't dared believe in. I remember the look on my parents' faces, pride mingled with confusion, as if they were seeing me through new eyes. For the first time, I saw myself differently too. Not as the girl who was too stupid, but as someone worthy. Someone capable. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Today, I chose me." It wasn't arrogance. It was a quiet declaration, a pact with myself to no longer hide in shadows or shrink for others' comfort. The grant meant resources, yes. But more than that, it meant permission, self-given, to pursue what I loved without apology. I embraced the long nights of research, the failed experiments, the meticulous note-taking. I embraced the doubt because with it came growth. I embraced the possibility that my worth wasn't defined by others' words. This was the moment the river found its course, not rushing or reckless, but steady, determined, and true. For years, I believed I was alone in my struggle, that the weight I carried was mine and mine alone. But the world has a way of gathering kindred souls, especially in the shadows where light feels scarce. At university, I met Mira. She was fierce and unapologetic, with a laugh that could fill a lecture hall and a refusal to be sidelined by anyone. She saw through the quiet walls I built and chipped away with relentless kindness. Our friendship was a refuge. We stayed up late, trading notes, frustrations, and dreams. We celebrated every small victory, a completed paper, a successful experiment, an encouraging comment from a professor. With Mira, I found not just camaraderie, but the courage to speak louder, to raise my hand in class, to claim space. She reminded me that intelligence isn't a single thread, but a tapestry woven from curiosity, resilience, and passion. Together, we navigated the labyrinth of academia, supporting each other through setbacks and celebrating breakthroughs. For the first time, I saw my journey reflected in someone else's eyes, a shared story of quiet strength, whispered determination, and the refusal to be invisible. In her, I found the mirror that showed me who I truly was. No victory is without its shadows. Even as the world began to open for me, the quiet battle within raged on. Doubt was a persistent companion, whispering cruel possibilities in the dead of night. What if this isn't real? What if you're a fraud? What if all this recognition, is a mistake? Imposter syndrome wrapped itself around me like a second skin, suffocating and relentless. There were nights I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, convinced that the next morning would bring a call telling me I'd failed, that I didn't belong. But then, I'd remember my grandmother's words. "You're a river, Olivia. You carve your way through stone." So I fought. With every experiment, every paper, every presentation, I pushed back. I leaned into my work with fierce resolve, letting data and discovery drown out the voices that questioned my worth. It wasn't easy, and it still isn't. But each day I choose to rise, to believe, to keep moving forward, even when the shadows press close. For so long, my story had been written by others, by their doubts, their dismissals, their expectations. But slowly, I began to understand that the pen was in my hands all along. Each research paper I published was a line in my narrative, each presentation a chapter declared in my voice. I learned to speak not just for science, but for myself. At conferences, I no longer shrank into the back row. I took the podium with steady hands and steady heart. And when the questions came, sharp and probing, I answered with honesty and confidence. This was no longer about proving them wrong. It was about telling the truth of who I was. A scientist. A woman. A survivor. The weight of past words, too stupid, grew lighter with every claim I made on my own behalf. I began mentoring younger women in the field, sharing not just knowledge, but the hard-won lesson that brilliance comes in many forms. I was no longer invisible. I was finally seen. The brightest lights don't just shine, they guide. As I stood on stages and held awards, I remembered the girl who sat in the back of the classroom, silenced by cruel words. I thought of the countless young women who might still be sitting there, doubting their worth, hiding their brilliance for fear of rejection. So I made a choice. I began speaking at schools, community centers, anywhere a young voice might tremble with uncertainty. I told my story, not just the triumphs, but the scars, the quiet moments of despair, the fierce will to rise again. I wanted those girls to know they were not alone, that their dreams were valid, even if others tried to erase them. I started scholarships in my grandmother's name, supporting students from small towns with big hopes. I created mentorship programs to nurture curiosity and resilience. I built bridges where walls once stood. Because the greatest gift is not the prize on the shelf, but the hand you extend to those following behind. Standing before Mr. Hensley that night in Stockholm, I realized something unexpected. Forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me. For years, I had carried the weight of his words like chains, binding me to a past I longed to escape. But when I saw the hesitation in his eyes, the recognition, the regret, I understood that my triumph wasn't about vengeance. It was about release. Forgiving him freed my heart from bitterness and opened space for peace. I didn't need his apology or acknowledgement. I needed to let go of the story where I was the victim and embrace the one where I am the author. And in that choice, I found true strength. No story is without its shadows. My journey wasn't just about victory or recognition. It was about embracing every part of myself, the doubts, the failures, the tears, and the triumphs. I learned to hold my scars gently, to see them not as weaknesses, but as testaments to endurance. I found joy in the messy, imperfect process of becoming, knowing that growth is never linear. There were days I still felt small, nights I wrestled with old fears. But I also celebrated the quiet victories, a breakthrough in the lab, a mentor's praise, a student's thank you. I realized that true power isn't perfection. It's authenticity. It's showing up, again and again, with an open heart. And in that I became whole. Success, I learned, doesn't end the battles, it changes their shape. After the Nobel announcement, the whispers began. Colleagues questioned my methods. Critics dissected my work with sharper scrutiny. Some dismissed my achievements as luck or a fluke. Even among those I once considered allies, there were quiet voices casting shadows of doubt. It was a reminder that the world isn't always ready for the kind of strength forged in silence. But I had learned to listen, to discern between the noise and the signal. I focused on my work, on the truth that science reveals through evidence and persistence. And slowly, respect replaced skepticism. I realized that part of my journey was teaching others to see beyond their biases, to recognize brilliance in unexpected forms. The fight wasn't over. It was evolving. And so was I. With recognition came new pressures, both external and internal. Family members, once distant or dismissive, began reaching out, some with genuine pride, others with tangled motives. They wanted a piece of my success, a claim to my light. Old friends grew distant, unable to reconcile the woman I was becoming with the girl they once knew. And I found myself torn between the ambition that fueled me and the relationships that grounded me. There were moments when I questioned if I could carry both worlds without breaking. But I learned that balance isn't about perfection. It's about boundaries. Saying no without guilt. Prioritizing my dreams without abandoning my roots. Embracing growth, even when it means leaving some things behind. And in that delicate dance, I found my own rhythm. For years, I believed strength meant armor, an unyielding shell that protected me from doubt and pain. But strength is more nuanced than that. It is allowing yourself to be seen, scars and all. During a lecture at a conference, I shared not just my findings, but my story, the setbacks, the whispered doubts, the journey from silence to voice. The room was still. Then, hands raised. Questions asked, not about data alone, but about resilience, about hope, about finding light in dark places. In that moment, I realized that vulnerability is a form of courage. That showing up fully imperfect, uncertain, is one of the most radical acts we can perform. And in sharing my truth, I found a deeper connection to my work, my colleagues, and myself. If you had told me years ago that the pain and rejection I endured would shape the very foundation of my success, I might have laughed bitterly. Yet hardship, as I've learned, is a harsh but honest teacher. It strips away illusions, tests our resolve, and forces us to confront our deepest fears. But it also gifts us with empathy, the ability to see beyond ourselves. It teaches patience, humility, and the beauty of perseverance. Looking back, I see how every obstacle was a stepping stone, every no a redirection. The woman I am today is not despite the struggles, but because of them. And with that understanding, the horizon expands, no longer defined by fear, but by possibility. Freedom is not a loud declaration. It is a quiet, steady unfolding, a slow unbinding of the chains we never knew we carried. For years, I measured freedom by achievements, titles, and recognition. But true freedom came when I stopped seeking approval from others and started honoring my own voice. It came in moments of stillness, in the choice to prioritize my peace over perfection. It came when I forgave myself for the times I faltered, for the moments I doubted. Freedom is choosing to live authentically, even when the world expects conformity. It's the breath that fills the spaces between doubt and hope. And it is, above all, the gift of being truly seen by myself. I often wonder what legacy really means. Is it the awards on a shelf or the names etched in history books? Or is it something more profound, the quiet ripple of inspiration that travels beyond us? I want my legacy to be a bridge for those who come after me, those still sitting in shadowed classrooms, still doubting their worth. I want to be a testament that the voices once silenced can become the loudest, that the too stupid can become the unstoppable. Every scholarship I fund, every girl I mentor, every story I share is a brick in that bridge. Because legacy is not what we leave behind, it's what we build while we are here. For so long, my worth was tied to others' opinions, the passing nods, the whispered judgments, the cold dismissals. I chased validation like a shadow, never quite able to catch it. But in time, I learned that worth is not a prize handed to us. It is a seed we nurture within. It grows from self-acceptance, from embracing our flaws and strengths alike. It thrives when we stop seeking permission to be ourselves. I am worthy not because of my accolades, but because I exist. Because my voice matters. Because my story, with all its pain and beauty, is mine. And that is enough. Humility is a quiet companion, reminding us to stay grounded, to listen, to learn. Pride, however, is a spark fueling our fire, celebrating our victories, affirming our worth. For years, I struggled to hold both without tipping into arrogance or self-doubt. I feared pride would make me unbearable and humility would make me invisible. But life taught me they are not enemies, but dance partners. Together, they create balance, humility to soften pride's edge, pride to give humility its voice. I learned to celebrate my successes without apology, to carry my story with grace, to be proud and humble, strong and gentle. This dance became a language of authenticity, one I hope others will learn to speak. Sometimes, I think about the roads I didn't take, the paths I abandoned out of fear or expectation. The opportunities one let slip away because I believed I wasn't enough. I wonder how different my life might have been if I'd shouted louder, taken more risks, or simply believed sooner. But regret is a heavy burden. So instead, I choose gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned on those detours. Gratitude for the strength forged in waiting and wandering. Gratitude for the journey itself, messy, uncertain, and beautifully mine. Because every road, even the ones not taken, brought me here. To this moment. To this woman. Resilience is not simply enduring. It is the art of rising, of bending without breaking, of carrying wounds yet continuing forward. There were times when hope was a flickering candle in a dark room, when the weight of doubt pressed so heavily I feared I might collapse. But resilience whispered in the quiet spaces. It told me to hold on, to believe, to trust the unseen. Hope became the thread that stitched my fractured dreams back together. And in that delicate dance between despair and possibility, I found my strength. Because resilience is a promise to oneself to keep moving no matter what. Pain, they say, is the crucible where transformation occurs. For years, I carried the weight of others' judgments, the sting of words meant to diminish me, the silent loneliness of feeling unseen. Yet within that pain, I found a strange alchemy. It was in the darkest hours, when the world seemed to close in, that I discovered a reservoir of strength I hadn't known existed. Each tear, each moment of despair, was a kind of refining fire, burning away self-doubt, revealing the core of who I truly was. I learned that pain doesn't have to be a sentence. It can be a catalyst, a teacher, a force that shapes us into something new, stronger, wiser, more compassionate. Through that transformation, I stepped out from the shadows. Not because the pain disappeared, but because I carried it differently. With grace, with courage, with a fierce determination to live fully and authentically. I became more than the sum of my scars. I became whole. For too long, my voice was a whisper lost in the noise of expectations, dismissals, and the echo of "you're not enough." I learned to speak softly, to avoid attention, to blend into the background. But silence can be a cage. And cages, no matter how familiar, eventually demand breaking. Reclaiming my voice wasn't about shouting louder than those who doubted me. It was about speaking my truth with clarity and confidence. It was about telling my story, not for sympathy or approval, but because it mattered. Because my experiences could light the way for others still struggling in shadows. I started small, conversations with mentors, presentations at workshops, stories shared with young women who needed to hear, "You belong." With every word spoken, the cage cracked. With every story told, my voice grew stronger. And finally, I could stand in any room and be heard not as an echo of someone else's expectations, but as the author of my own narrative. Reclaiming my voice was reclaiming my power. And it was the most liberating act of all. There is a quiet revolution that happens within a soul when it moves from survival to thriving. It is not loud or dramatic, it is subtle yet irrevocable. Like the slow unfurling of a bud in spring, it begins with a single decision to no longer be defined by the shadows cast by others, to step fully into the light of one's own becoming. My journey to that place of unbreakable strength was neither swift nor easy. It was paved with setbacks and sorrow, moments of paralyzing doubt, and nights spent wrestling with the whispering ghosts of failure. The memory of Mr. Hensley's cruel words was never far beneath the surface, a shadow that threatened to consume the light I fought so hard to nurture. Yet, with every step forward, I gathered pieces of myself that had been scattered, fragments of hope, shards of courage, glimmers of resilience. I learned that strength was not the absence of vulnerability, but the embrace of it. It was the grace to fall and rise again, each time with more resolve and clearer purpose. I found sanctuary in small victories. The first time I led a research presentation without trembling, the day my published work was cited by a respected scientist, the quiet applause of a student I mentored who finally saw their own worth. These moments, seemingly insignificant to the outside world, were the bricks building the fortress of my confidence. Unbreakable is not an armor, it is a foundation, solid, steadfast, and deeply rooted in self-love. It is the fierce knowing that no external voice holds dominion over your truth. It is the freedom to claim your space unapologetically and the humility to carry others with you as you rise. Tonight, as I stand on the precipice of all I have become, I see that the greatest triumph is not the accolades or the recognition. It is the journey itself, the weaving of light and shadow into a tapestry that is uniquely mine. And in that tapestry, I am whole. Victory is not always heralded by fanfare or applause. Sometimes it is the stillness that follows the storm, the soft, profound moment when the world finally falls away and you stand alone with yourself, unmasked and unafraid. I have come to understand that my triumph was never about proving anyone else wrong. It was about proving myself right. About standing in a room filled with brilliance and knowing I belong, not because someone handed me that permission, but because I claimed it for myself. The banquet hall in Stockholm was a stage, yes, but it was also a threshold. A place where the girl once silenced by a cruel word crossed into the woman who speaks her truth without hesitation. And yet, as the chandeliers glittered overhead and the crowd's eyes rested on me, I felt a profound calm. Not triumph's roar, but its gentle hum. Because the greatest victories are not trophies or titles. They are the internal battles won in quiet moments, when doubt tried to pull you under, but you surfaced anyway. When fear whispered stop, but you moved forward. When the world counted you out, but you counted yourself in. In the aftermath of the accolades, I returned to the small things that nourish the soul, the laughter of friends, the pages of a beloved book, the first bloom of spring after a long winter. I realized that true success is not just measured by achievements, but by the peace we find within. And in that peace, I am free. The Nobel Prize, the accolades, the public recognition, they were milestones, but not destinations. After the lights dimmed and the crowd's applause faded, I found myself standing at a different kind of threshold, a place where the real work began. It is the space between the external victories and internal peace, where the echoes of past wounds meet the quiet call to healing. In the stillness, I confronted the parts of myself I had long avoided, the doubts that whispered in the shadows, the fears that shaped my choices, the loneliness of feeling unseen for so long. I realized that liberation is not a one-time event, but a lifelong journey. It is the practice of embracing all parts of ourselves, the triumphant and the broken, the confident and the vulnerable. It is learning to love ourselves fiercely, without conditions or qualifications. And it is recognizing that true power lies not in trophies, but in compassion, in the courage to extend grace to ourselves and others. I began to write letters, not to those who doubted me, but to the younger girl I once was, the one who sat quietly in the back of the classroom, silenced by cruel words. I told her she was enough, that her dreams mattered, that she was destined for greatness beyond the confines of anyone's expectations. And as I wrote, I felt a healing deeper than any accolade could provide, because the greatest prize is not the one given by the world. It is the one we give ourselves. There is a quiet power in endings, an echo that lingers long after the final words have been spoken. But every ending is also a beginning, a doorway to something yet unseen. As I close this chapter of my story, I am filled not with finality, but with promise. The journey from the girl who was told she was too stupid for science to the woman standing on the world stage was never about proving others wrong. It was about proving to myself that my worth is intrinsic, untouchable by judgment or doubt. I have carried scars, yes, wounds etched by words and neglect, by silence and exclusion. But those scars are not my chains. They are my map. They tell the story of resilience, of survival, of fierce determination to be seen and heard. They remind me that the light we carry within can never be extinguished by the darkness around us. I have learned that true success is not in the accolades or the recognition, but in the quiet moments of self-acceptance, in the hands we hold, the lives we touch, the stories we share. My grandmother's garden still blooms in my memory, the lesson of roots and patience, growth beneath the snow. I plant new seeds now in young hearts, in open minds, in the spaces where dreams take root. The banquet in Stockholm was not the end. It was a milestone. A beacon, a reminder that the story continues, and that in every whispered doubt, every cruel word, lies the spark of a future unbound. So to every girl who has been told she is less than enough, I see you. I hear you. And I promise, your light will shine. Because the silent river finds the sea. And the story, our story, is far from over.